Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin, and today I want to share a Bigfoot report I received some time ago, and this one gave me the creeps like no other. Here it goes. Hi Bob, my Bigfoot encounter doesn't feel like a normal Bigfoot encounter, or at least nothing as simple as bumping into a large animal. I grew up in almost Idaho and Montana, outside of Missoula, and was raised by my dad. My mom left us when I was a baby. Dating the first event is easy because it happened on my 14th birthday. If I was 14 then, I guess it was 1975 because I was born in 61. At first, nothing about that day seemed out of the ordinary. But looking back, it was the day my father changed, forever. Something had unsettled him. Something that made him afraid. And whatever it was watching us. We were poor. Not dirt poor, not even poor, just poor. So, I wasn't expecting anything special for my birthday. Maybe a nice dinner or a new coat. But when my dad picked me up after school, I knew something was off. His grip on the steering wheel was tight. His eyes darted between the road and the rearview mirror. Then, out of nowhere, he laid down a set of strange rules. No going outside alone. No going outside at night. Keep the blinds shut. At first, I thought he was joking. Then, I saw his face. He wasn't joking. When I asked why, his answer fumbled between a bear and a drifter. Neither made sense. We were surrounded by farmland, not deep forest. Bears weren't common. And a drifter? Here? Something had scared my dad. And whatever it was, he didn't want me to see it. We pulled into the driveway, and my dad hesitated. It was barely noticeable, just a flicker of hesitation before he parked. As we stepped inside, I expected silence. Instead, I heard whispers, then, surprise. A few relatives and friends had gathered. My dad had thrown me a small birthday party, pretending as if nothing had happened. But I noticed something odd. We had parked at the front, which we never did. Normally, we entered through the back, near the kitchen. I glanced at my dad, but he only shrugged. The party was fun, but he kept sneaking glances out the window. At some point, he and my grandfather disappeared. When they returned, my dad announced we'd be staying at my grandparents' house for a few nights. No explanation. Just a casual, it'll be easier for school. I didn't question it then. Now, I wonder if he was trying to keep me safe. 2 years passed. Whatever had shaken my dad that night seemed forgotten. Until one summer evening, when everything changed. I was lying in bed, drifting towards sleep, when the porch light flicked on. A soft glow spilled through my window. I ignored it at first. Probably my dad checking on something. Then, click. The light went off. A few seconds later, click. It came back on. I sat up, suddenly alert. The flickering continued, erratic and deliberate, like someone was toying with the switch. That's when I realized I hadn't heard my dad get up. The old farmhouse carried every creak and footstep, yet the house was silent. Then, a sound. Low, guttural, almost a growl. It morphed into a high-pitched warbling giggle, rising in volume, twisting into a shrieking laugh, inhuman, unnatural. I froze. My body refused to move. Then, thud. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. My dad. Down, he barked. I dove under my bed just as I heard the shotgun blast. The front door flew open. Another shot. Then another. My dad's voice, furious and terrified, bellowed into the night. Then, silence. The next thing I remember was my dad standing in my doorway, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. He scanned my empty bed, and for the first time in my life, I heard him gasp in terror. My dad stood frozen in the doorway, his chest rising and falling with panicked breaths. His shotgun was clenched in both hands, smoke curling from the barrel. His eyes darted around the room, wide, searching. For a second, I didn't move. Then, Barely above a whisper, I croaked, "Dad?" His whole body jolted as he spun toward the sound of my voice. When his eyes landed on me, half crawling out from under the bed, he exhaled sharply, a sound I had never heard from him before. Relief, raw and unfiltered. He crossed the room in 2 strides, gripping my arms tightly. His hands were trembling. "You stay right here," he ordered, voice low, urgent. Then, as if realizing how tightly he was holding me, he let go. "Don't move." He disappeared into the hallway, checking every door, every window. Outside, the wind carried the last echoes of his gunfire into the night. I sat there, too afraid to follow. My heart pounded against my ribs, my ears still ringing from the gunshots. And then I noticed something. The porch light switch. It was inside the house. The only way to flip it was from within. My stomach knotted as I crept toward the front door. My dad was already there, standing rigid, staring at the wooden frame. I followed his gaze. That's when I saw it. The window screen beside the door, removed. Not torn, not damaged. Just lifted out and placed neatly against the wall. Something had reached inside. I looked up at my dad. He was gripping his shotgun so tightly his knuckles were white. "That wasn't a bear," I whispered. My dad didn't answer. He just nodded, jaw clenched. And in that moment, I realized he had known all along. My dad called the police. He barely spoke as he waited, his fingers drumming against the shotgun stock. When they arrived, 2 officers stepped out, their expressions unreadable. Dad led them to the porch, pointing at the window. "It reached inside," he said flatly. One officer crouched, inspecting the neatly removed screen. The other studied the door, running a hand over the scattered buckshot holes. "We get a few calls like this every year," one of them finally said. His tone was disturbingly casual. "They don't usually bother people." "Usually." My dad stiffened. "You're not filing a report?" The officer shook his head. "Not much we can do." "Best thing? Leave it alone." Something in my dad snapped. His voice turned sharp, cutting through the night. It came inside my damn house. Neither officer reacted. Instead, one turned to me. "You see anything, kid?" I swallowed. "Just the light, and the sound." The officer nodded like he'd heard it before. Then, without another word, they left. The silence they left behind felt heavier than before. That's when my dad made a decision. We drove straight to our closest neighbor, an old man who rarely left his property. The moment he opened his door and saw my dad's face, he sighed. "It happened, didn't it?" My dad hesitated. "You know about this?" The old man stepped aside, motioning for us to enter. "Son," he muttered, locking the door behind us, "you have no idea what you're dealing with." The old man led us inside, shutting every curtain before speaking. His voice was low, steady. "It's been here before." He glanced at my dad. "You saw it, didn't you?" My dad hesitated. Then, finally, he nodded. 2 years ago." I turned to him, confused. He'd never mentioned this before. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Your 14th birthday. I came home early and saw something." He described a figure crouched in our old sandbox, digging. It was human-shaped but wrong. Lanky yet broad, its long arms pulling sand toward its chest. At first, he thought it was an animal. But as he got closer, it stood. And ran. Not like a person. Not even like a bear. It moved unnaturally fast, screaming in a high-pitched wail as it fled toward the trees. Then, the neighbor added something worse. "They bury things." He led us outside to an overgrown pit near his barn. Digging with a shovel, he unearthed a pile of objects. Angels. 12 of them. Lawn ornaments, ceramic statues, Christmas decorations, all buried. Among them were magnets from our fridge, a small notebook we hadn't noticed missing, and a photo of me once pinned inside my dad's truck. I stared at it, my skin crawling. Someone, or something, had taken these from our home. The old man crossed his arms. "They don't just watch," he murmured. "They collect." My dad said nothing, but I could see it in his face. He knew. He'd always known. We left the neighbor's house in silence. My dad's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in his chair, shotgun across his lap, eyes fixed on the front door. I stayed on the couch, too afraid to close my eyes. Days passed. Then weeks. Nothing happened. But my dad never let his guard down. He reinforced the locks, kept the blinds shut, and never left me alone. Eventually, life moved on. I grew up, moved away. But even now, I think about it. About the porch light. The laughter. The things buried in the sand. And about my dad, who spent the rest of his life watching the tree line. Because deep down, he knew. It was never just a bear. And whatever it was, it never really left.